Hello and thank you for watching the Angry Rooster Creations channel. Today I've got another fountain pen related video, but this one in particular we're going to be looking at some notebooks and some paper. The notebooks here on the table are some Pen Gear Poly notebooks that come from Walmart. These are specifically the two that you see here. There are several different notebooks that if you just search Pen Gear Poly notebook, you'll find a few different options, but specifically I want to talk about these two, that being this dot gridded book and this graph ruled book, both of which are only available with the white covers that you see here in a spiral bound book that has 80 sheets. And both of these are listed as having heavyweight paper. There's not a GSM or a poundage rating given for that. It's just noted as heavyweight paper. Both of these, the paper is perforated, so it's an easy tear out paper if you need it to do so. And on both of these, the ruling seems to be on the graph here. The graph rule, it says 5x5. They're the same. The ruling, it seems to be a 5mm ruling. Now, these particular books, I'm just going to show this because some people tend to take note of this when they're talking about the papers from Walmart. These particular books are both made in India, presumably probably at the same factory or roughly in the same area. Now, I will say this. I bought these books. This one I purchased recently, the dot ruled book. This one I had actually purchased about a year or so ago, really before I was making any kind of videos, so I wasn't anticipating making a video or anything on this book when I bought it. I bought it to have a spiral bound graph ruled book, and I didn't really look into it much when I was at the store. I assumed this was just the typical blue lined graph paper that you usually get. You usually buy loose in like shrink wrap, and it's not. It has a gray black ruling, and instead of being 1/4 inch, it's 5mm. I didn't look at it that much then, didn't think much about it. It wasn't until I was actually getting more into trying to write with my pens, and I looked at this one and thought I would try it out, and I was like, hey, actually I think I've already got one of these books. So anyways, that's why we're looking at both of them today. Now, I did take the time to go ahead and do some writing samples just for the sake of brevity. Trying to shorten this video a bit. So I went ahead and did some writing samples in both of these books. Now, the inks that I chose to use are some inks that most of these, especially these on the upper half of the paper, are inks that I know are very temperamental. They're inks that are prone to bleeding, prone to feathering, and prone to spreading on a lot of papers. That's Noodler's Bad Blue Heron, which is one of the Warden series inks. And then I've got Noodler's Polar Brown, Polar Green, and Polar Krill, and Noodler's Polar Blood Falls. Now, the Polar Blood Falls seems to be less temperamental as the other polar inks that I've used. It seems to be usable on more papers. But the other polar inks here tend to feather and they tend to spread. They're very aggressive inks. I've also got Noodler's Bay State Concord Grape here, which is not necessarily an aggressive ink, but surprisingly, it seems to be the only ink that wanted a feather on this paper. Noodler's Heart of Darkness, which is not really a problematic ink. It's just, I had it, and it's a pretty common ink, so I decided to throw that one on here. And then these samples here at the bottom are both the same ink. It's Monteverde Purple Rain, which is more of a standard kind of ink, not really something known to be very temperamental. It's just, I had it in a pen, a Jinhao 992 with a medium nib, and then I had it in a Hongdian N7 with a long blade nib, which is a very wet flowing architect style of nib grind. And I wanted to see, because I've had this particular pen with this ink bleed through some papers, so I wanted to see how it handled on here. Especially, I think part of that being that this ink actually is a lubricated ink, that ITF technology there. If you look that up, it's a lubricated treatment that's supposed to enhance flow in pens and help with lubricating piston systems. But as you can see, anyways, getting back on the back of the page here, None of these bled through. There are no bleed spots on this paper. There's no real ghosting on this paper anywhere. And I was very surprised to see this. Like, very surprised. These inks, I expected fully to see them bleed through this paper. I was skeptical that this, heavyweight paper would hold up to these inks. This is what I would consider a torture test. And if anybody's familiar with these particular inks, these polar inks, especially in that Warden series, that Bad Blue Heron, you should know that they are very paper specific. Like, these are some of the worst case torture testing inks. Now, most of these I did use an extra fine nib on, which does kind of help to tame some of their properties, but the Polar Green was in a medium nib. And then in the Polar Bloodfalls, I did 2 tests because I've got 2 pens inked up. One's an extra fine, it's a Hongdian C2, and the Jinhao 992 with a medium nib. And on the tops, like I said, there's really no feathering or spreading, no growing, nothing ugly. The Bay State Concord grape had a few places where it seemed like it wanted to feather, and that's the only one that I saw really kind of show any negative, anything that you might not want to see on the front of the page. And certainly, like, if I open this up, so you'll see it over top of another white page to kind of make this show through as much as it possibly could. You could absolutely 100% write on the back side of this page with any of the inks that I used here, and what you wrote would be legible on both sides. Nothing would show through to the point that would make anything you wrote hard to read on this particular paper, which I was very surprised about. And I'm going to quickly go over the graph ruled version. It's mostly the same. I will say that oddly, now I purchased these 2 books about a year apart. I've had this graph rule book for longer. But they mostly perform the same. The biggest issue, I think, with the graph rule book, I think the lines here, like I said, these are gray or sort of, I guess it's mostly gray. It's not really a black line, but it's more bold, darker lines than the sort of blue-lined, quarter-inch graph paper that I'm more used to seeing. And so with some of the inks, they're all pretty legible, but I would say that in some cases it gets a little bit busy, especially if you're trying to write within that 5mm ruling there. As you can see on all of these, I skipped lines. On the cases of writing where I was writing using 2 lines for the words and writing bigger on the paper, it's more legible here. But I have a feeling if you were going to try and keep within that 5mm spacing to write smaller, for one thing, I would use a finer nib. I probably would not use one of these asymmetrical style nibs, this being that Architect Grind and this Noodler's Legal Blue. I mostly wrote on here not as a test to see how the paper handled this ink. This ink works amazing on like even the worst papers imaginable, the most absorbent papers. This is very resistant to bleed and feathering and stuff. But this was a long knife, a Kaigelu long knife nib, which is sort of a asymmetrical naginata togi style of nib. And I wanted to see how this writing with this other asymmetrical nib would stand out against the graph ruling. And it's not terrible, but I would say that if you were going to use the 2 rulings, the dot grid would be better if you're going to try to actually write and journal. The graph grid might be better if you're going to be doing some kind of sketching or jotting of plans or doing drawings of things. Say you work in construction or any other kind of building industry. That might be a reason why you would want to use the graph rule, but for general writing purposes, you'd be better off with the dot grid. Now, I will like to show that, like I said, this book here I bought a year prior to buying the graph rule book, or the dot grid book, and it did not quite handle the ink, it didn't handle the ink quite as well. You will see that there are some points of ghosting here. And there is one, it wasn't a bleed, this didn't bleed through, it didn't touch the cover sheet on the back, but it did ghost pretty heavily. And that is where I wrote the wrong word and went back over it with that Architect nib. So I was doubling up lines when some of that ink was still wet, and it did cause it to kind of push through. But like I said, that is an extremely wet flowing nib, and a pen that flows pretty wet with a lubricated ink. So that's the main reason I was wanting to use that pen, though, to test on this paper. But other than that, for the most part, you could use both sides of the paper here. It just, on this graph rule book, it didn't handle it quite as well as a dot grid book. And that's one thing, too, to think about. When you're looking at a house brand from somewhere like Walmart or just anywhere, a lot of times these house brands, what they'll do is they put out a contract with certain specifications that has to be met for a particular product, and different companies will compete and put out quotes, and then the parent company, whoever it is, Walmart, Hobby Lobby, you know, pick Michael's, pick your store, they'll choose a supplier whose bid that they like, and they'll get that contract. So sometimes between, like, say, you buy one a year ago, or you buy one to now, like July 2025, when I bought this one, there's a possibility you're going to get different batch runs, or possibly also you might get one that was made in a different factory. Now, it could be a factory in the same, roughly the same area, but, you know, at different times it could be slightly different formulations of paper, etc. So, you know, you'll have to sort of test this anytime you buy another. If you were to buy one of these books and then you buy another one like a year after the fact, you might be able to expect to see that, you know, one book might handle the ink better, like exceptionally well, one might handle it all right. That's just kind of, you know, that's kind of a part of buying these affordable store brands. Sometimes there's going to be a variation one batch to the next. And with these, I don't know if I've mentioned this already, but these cost $2.42 per book. They're very cheap. Like I said, they're only available with this white color, so there's not really any options. The only real two options is whether you want dot grid or graph ruled. And these were available off the shelf at my local Walmart. I walked in and picked them up. You know, yeah, I didn't have to order these. Now, there is a version of both of these with the same white cover and the same paper, made also in India, that you can get, but instead of getting it in a spiral bound book, you can get it in a tape bound saddle stitch composition book. But from what I've seen, I looked on the website just to see if there were other options for these books, and the composition books appear to only be sold on Walmart.com. So if you want a composition book with the paper that's in these, you have to order those. But like I said, these spiral bound books, probably most Walmarts carry this. I know at least the two local Walmarts I go to both had these. So, you know, there it is. But that's pretty much going to do it for this video. I was trying to keep this one shorter. I know I tend to ramble and carry on pretty long with a lot of my videos. But for what it's worth, for $2.42, this is a full-sized, like full notebook, full-size notebook with 80 sheets. I think this is probably some of the most affordable fountain pen friendly paper in a notebook that I've found. I mean, I've used these little, I haven't made a video or anything, but I've used one of these little brown notebooks that people I have shown some videos of, or people have talked about in videos I've seen before, that handle ink quite well, but those are only 30 pages and they're a smaller size for like a sketch and go or like a little journal cover kind of deal. But for a, you know, typical size, you know, one subject notebook, these handle the ink very well. I think they're absolutely worth the $2.42. I'm not necessarily going to say they're the best paper. Also, like I said, they may not be the most consistent batch to batch, but that comes with the territory of affordable store brand paper. But with all that having been said, that's going to do it for this video. If you've watched it to the end, I thank you. If you got some useful information out of this, I'd appreciate a thumbs up. That'd help me out down there. And also, if you got any questions, maybe there's something I neglected to mention that you want to know that I failed to answer in this video, drop it down there in the comment section. I should see it, and I will try to get back to you. I try to reply to all my comments. And, you know, if you've watched this video, maybe watch some of my ink tests and other things that I've done, and you appreciate the content, you think I do a good job, I'd also appreciate a subscription. That'd help me out too. But that's all I've got for this one. I thank you for watching, and I hope to catch you on the next video. Bye.